This is a text of a talk given at the Internationale Hypnose Congress in Zurich, Switzerland, in November 2019, entitled An Explanation of the Powers of Franz Mesmer, or the alternative title, The Revolution in Brainwave Research. Brainwaves were first discovered by a German scientist, Hans Berger. He recorded the first human electroencephalogram, EEG, in 1924, but because he was filled with doubt, he did not publish until 5 years later his discovery, which demonstrated the technique for recording the electrical activity of the human brain from the surface of the head. Initially, his discovery was met with derision and incredulity by the German scientific establishment. He was regarded as a crank. What is particularly poignant is that his initial inspiration was a personal experience of mental telepathy when he was a young man serving in the cavalry. His horse reared and he was thrown into the path of a horse-drawn cannon. He was not actually hurt, but he was very shaken. His sister, however, who was several kilometers away, had the premonition that he was in danger, and she insisted their father send him a telegram. Berger later wrote of this incident, "It was a case of spontaneous telepathy, in which at a time of mortal danger, and as I contemplated certain death, I transmitted my thoughts, while my sister, who was particularly close to me, acted as the receiver." He became obsessed with this question, how his mind could have conveyed a signal to his sister, and after he completed his military service, he went to university to study medicine, with a particular interest in psychiatry and neurology. His mission was to discover the psychological basis of psychic energy. In his own words, he was engaged in the search for the correlation between the objective activity in the brain and subjective psychic phenomena. He discovered the alpha wave by inserting silver wires under the patient's scalp, one at the front of the head and one at the back. After much trial and error with recording equipment, he managed to record electrical voltages as small as 1/10,000th of a volt. The American roboticist William Gray Walter, who visited his laboratory several years later, reported, "He was completely ignorant of the technical and physical basis of his method. He knew nothing about mechanics or electricity." 90 years later, an electroencephalography is a major area of research. Various bandwidths have been identified and extensively studied. In addition to the alpha band, there are the beta, gamma, and theta waves, and other regular rhythms besides. Bandwidths have been associated with various mental states, and irregularities in brainwave rhythms have been identified as the symptoms and causes of disease. The body of expertise is growing, where brainwaves are being used to allow us to communicate with BCIs, brain-computer interfaces, and other neuroprosthetics and connected electronic devices. There are research papers in optogenetics where brainwaves have been used to alter gene expression. We have even got to the stage where people are playing video games using only their mind, communicating their thoughts via brainwaves. All this advance in brainwave communication techniques is merely the tip of the iceberg compared with what is coming up. The revolution has occurred this year. A new research paper has taken the significance of brainwaves to a whole new level. Researchers have for the first time translated thoughts into recognizable words. This is literally the start of mind-reading technology. Neuroengineers used an AI deep learning device, a DNN, and a voice synthesis vocoder to translate into sound the brainwaves from the auditory cortex of a subject who had heard the words. This is a case of technology reading the brainwaves produced by human thoughts, but the clear implication is that communication is possible via brainwaves between gifted therapists, healers, and their patients. Recent advances in radiogenetics. At the outset, I would just like to elucidate a general misconception about radio emissions. It is widely believed that the golden years of radio ended in the 1950s or thereabouts, and that radio transmissions only involve the transmission of audio signals, principally voice and music. The fact is that all of modern electronics that involves the transmission of information via EMR, electromagnetic radiation, are simply different aspects of radio transmissions, including television, cell phones, Wi-Fi, remote control devices, radar, GPS navigation, and wireless Bluetooth devices. If the information is being transmitted by EMR, it's a radio. The radio spectrum extends from extremely low frequency ELF waves from 3 to 30 Hz through to tremendously high frequency THF from 300 to 3000 terahertz. 1 terahertz is 1 trillion cycles per second, which ends somewhere in the UV range, even higher than visible light. It's an interesting fact that human brainwaves are in the same range as ELF waves, and from the point of view of this paper, they are considered to be radio waves. The definition of an electronic device is that it generates radio waves for the purpose of communication, which means that the human brain is an electronic device. In nature, there is only one fundamental force that is relevant to this issue, and that's the electromagnetic force. And the apparent plethora of different forms of energy that are at work in nature are all actually just different aspects of this one fundamental force. Electricity, bioelectricity, chemoelectricity, electromagnetic radiation, EMR, electromotive force, EMF, magnetic fields, electronics, to name only the main headings. These all then have subgroups like alternating current, direct current, all the different frequencies of EMR, integrated circuits, and semiconductor and nanotechnology in electronics that involve quantum mechanics, and geomagnetics, biomagnetics, electromagnetics, etc. The point is that they are all just different aspects of the fundamental electromagnetic force, and under different conditions they generate each other. For instance, a moving magnet will generate electricity. An electric current creates a magnetic field as well as electrons lining up in metals. An alternating current emits radio waves at the same frequency as the current. And an electric current in a coil around a stationary piece of metal will cause it to become a magnet and will spin a magnet to create a mechanical force. Biophotons, which are EMR, are spectral lines of atoms emitted from a semiconductor when the electrons fall back from the conduction band to the valence band. The essential point for the purpose of this article is that brainwaves are ELF radio waves, and so they are just one aspect of the electromagnetic force and are emitted by an alternating current in the brain. And the fact that the brain emits radio waves means that it can actually receive radio waves as well. The brain can act as an antenna. Later in this article, I present a model of the brain as a wirelessly connected electronic device, and I list the various ways the brain emits and receives these ELF radio waves. In biology and neurophysiology, there are now thousands of research papers about optogenetics and radiogenetics, where cellular and genetic processes are being initiated and mediated by EMR. And yet biologists still talk in terms of electrochemical and biochemical and biophotons, and remain blissfully unaware that they are dealing with nano and semiconductor technology, i.e. electronics. Brainwaves are actually ELF radio waves, and they are virtually unstoppable. They use ELF radio waves for communication between submarines underwater. Brainwaves are totally robust and detectable external to the skull, and there is no reason in theory why they could not be detected by another brain miles away. As mentioned earlier, nowadays there are any number of BCIs and neural prosthetics on the market where brainwaves are used for communication to connected electronic devices. In 2014, a research paper was published in Nature Genetics entitled Remote Regulation of Glucose Homeostasis Using Genetically Encoded Nanoparticles, which launched a new direction in optogenetics which is known as radiogenetics. Radiogenetics will make it possible to remotely control biological targets in living animals without wires, implants, or drugs. A research team at Rockefeller University used electromagnetic waves to turn on the insulin production to lower blood sugar levels in diabetic mice. A naturally occurring iron storage particle in the body, ferritin, when exposed to a radio wave or a magnetic field, can activate an ion channel called TRPV1, which in turn leads to the activation of an insulin-producing gene. These two proteins, ferritin and TRPV1, acting together as a nanomachine, can be used to trigger gene expression in vivo, and it is all done by radio waves. The method allows one to wirelessly control the expression of genes in a living animal and could potentially be used for conditions like hemophilia to control the production of a missing protein. Two key attributes that the system are that the system is genetically encoded and can activate cells remotely and quickly, says Jeffrey Friedman, the Marilyn M. Simpson Professor, head of the Laboratory of Molecular Genetics at Rockefeller University. Radiogenetics is being heralded as being more effective than other systems in optogenetics that simply use light as the on-off switch, which tend to be only effective near the skin and require permanent implants. Originally, the researchers used low-frequency radio waves, which heat or move the ferritin particles, and the TRPV1, which is situated in the membrane surrounding the cell, opens up a channel allowing calcium ions to flow through and activate a piece of synthetic DNA implanted upstream to the gene they want to turn on. In this case, it was the gene that synthesizes the protein insulin, but it seems that in this way they can activate any gene of interest. Interestingly, the researchers were able to achieve the same result by manipulating the ferritin with a magnetic field, which obviously recalls the theories of Franz Mesmer in the 18th century about animal magnetism and the magnetic cure. It could well be the case that a hypnotist is able to channel his or her brain waves, which are ELF radio waves, to manipulate the ferritin in the cells and genes of his or her subjects. Mesmer himself stated that the magnets were immaterial to his treatment, and what was essential was his state of mind towards the patient. He was willing the patient to be healed, and there is a reasonable amount of authority for the proposition that the brain waves, ELF radio waves, of healer and patient become synchronized. Indeed, one-on-one interlocution, or close contact in general, seems to have a mutual effect on the brain waves of the participants. I stress that this new research used low-frequency radio waves, and this is precisely what brain waves are, and that they apparently act in exactly the same way as a magnetic field. The use of a radio frequency-driven magnetic field is a big advance in remote gene expression because it is non-invasive and easily adaptable, says Jonathan Dordick, who is the Howard P. Iserman Professor of Chemical and Biological Engineering and Vice President of Research at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. You don't have to insert anything, no wires, no light systems. The genes are introduced through gene therapy. You can have a wearable device that provides a magnetic field to certain parts of the body, and it might be used therapeutically for many diseases, including neurodegenerative diseases. It's limitless at this point. In this current study, we've shown that by opening the TRPV1 channel to allow calcium ions to enter the cell, we can turn on a gene. Since neurons can be depolarized by calcium and other positively charged ions, such as those the TRPV1 channel controls, we hope that this system may be effective at regulating neural activity, says co-first author Sarah Stanley, a senior research associate in Friedman's lab. It is well settled that ferritin protein is widely expressed in the brain, and a whole new area of genetic engineering is being developed called magnetogenetics, specifically concerned with targeting ferritin in the dopamine pathway of the brain in order to remotely control and influence specific behavioral patterns. In an unrelated area of research, it has been found that low-frequency RF radio waves affect the expression of the C-Fos proto-oncogene in the brain. And most importantly, it has been found that ELF radio waves, in this case 50 Hz, affect the methylation of the DNA, that is to say epigenetic factors that can have far-reaching effects both physically and mentally. And there are many research papers where ELF radio waves affect gene expression and cellular processes, including calcium flux. Franz Mesmer. This finding in radiogenetics that a low-frequency radio wave acts on the ferritin in our body and brain in exactly the same way as a magnetic field to trigger cellular and gene expression in vivo has now blurred the distinctions between all fields of conventional and alternative medicine. In conventional medicine, it indicates that medical and biological and genetic processes are not electrochemical at all, but are in fact electronic. And in alternative medicine, it provides an explanation of the powers of Franz Mesmer, who is the founder of all healing practices that the mainstream scientific community has chosen to dismiss as unscientific in the past 250 years. In his lifetime, Franz Mesmer was branded a charlatan by the scientific community on account of his claim of being able to cure many maladies and medical problems through animal magnetism. Notwithstanding this, although his specific claim to possess the power of animal magnetism has been discounted, his methods have had a vast influence in every branch of mental healing and spiritual healing and healing through hypnotism, as well as New Age techniques that involve not only the power of suggestion, but also the physical laying on of hands. The list of actual movements that have adopted Mesmer's techniques include eclecticism, phrenology, spiritualism, mind cure, Christian Science, homeopathy, transcendentalism, New Thought, Theosophy, psychoanalysis, osteopathy, chiropractic, anthroposophy, holistic health, positive thinking, New Age healing, hypnotism, biophysics, biomagnetism, magnetobiology, and psychiatry. In addition to these specific healing practices, there is mounting evidence that the Earth's magnetic field influences virtually all biological processes, the functions of enzymes and proteins, the way plants grow, the way animals orientate, and human physical and mental health and efficiency in our daily practices. Mainstream science has long dismissed the Earth's magnetic field as too weak to substantially influence biological processes. The magnetic field is said to be 1,000 times weaker than a typical horseshoe magnet, but the evidence is mounting that it is precisely these extremely low frequencies, ELFs, that can affect multicellular structures like human beings. In this regard, there is also the so-called Schumann frequency that encircles the Earth and is an ELF just like brainwaves. All this phenomena comes within the ambit of Mesmer's original theory as well. Mesmer wrote his medical thesis about the gravitational effects principally of the moon on human beings, which was first put forward by Richard Meade, a friend of Isaac Newton. He was impressed by the universal gravitation by which our bodies are harmonized. Mesmer developed this into a general theory of universal magnetic fluid that explains the influence of the heavenly bodies on human beings and indeed on all earthly creatures. In fact, the existence of the Earth's magnetic field has been known since ancient times, but a formal analytical and scientific expression of it was obtained about 20 years after Mesmer's death. In the light of the research above in radiogenetics that low-frequency electromagnetic waves can act on the ferritin in our bodies in exactly the same way as a magnetic field, the question needs to be asked whether this is the explanation for all mind-body therapies and all the therapies that come loosely under the heading of magnetobiology. The point is that brain waves, ELF radio waves, could be directly involved, or in the case of magnetobiology and geomagnetics, they could be simulating brain waves. Brain waves in hypnosis. Of all the spin-offs of Mesmer's theory, the most obvious and sequentially direct is hypnotism. In fact, some of his followers started to develop the theory of hypnotism contemporaneously with him. Hypnotism emerged out of mesmerism, so it will be instructive to review the brainwave theory that is associated with the hypnotized state. In modern hypnosis, there are many theorists who have suggested that it is best understood as a neurological or a psychobiological phenomenon. The psychologist Ernest Rossi, PhD, proposed that hypnosis was a natural part of the body's regularly alternating cycles of attentiveness and relaxation called ultradian rhythms that occur every 90 to 150 minutes. EEG frequency analysis today tends to focus on the issue of band frequencies associated with hypnosis, specifically the question of whether one band frequency, such as alpha or theta, is most representative of the hypnotized brain. Early studies in this area suggested that hypnosis is an alpha state. This notion was widely popularized, even leading to higher consciousness workshops on learning to generate alpha rhythms, and the creation of special alpha wave synchronizing machines made commercially available to help you do so. However, hypnosis is not simply an alpha state. The research on alpha waves as an indicator of hypnosis is quite ambiguous, but some research regarding alpha waves suggests that they may indeed have some relationship to hypnotic susceptibility either before or during hypnosis. Studies of EEG brainwave activity tend to show that the theta band is associated with higher levels of hypnotic susceptibility, both in eyes open and eyes closed pre-hypnosis baselines and also during the induction of hypnosis. Theta is also associated with focused attention, clearly a necessary component of the hypnotic experience. Thus, as individuals enter hypnosis, EEG theta power tends to increase. This increase may be observed in low hypnotizables as well as highs, but is more pronounced in highs. It is generally accepted that some therapists have the ability of being hypnotic, which actually enables them to modulate or influence these slow-wave theta oscillations. This can be done by their ability to develop and enhance rapport, the timing and phrasing of language, and environmental factors, music in the waiting area, a calming versus chaotic clinic environment, which all can influence oscillation patterns and therefore clinical responsivity. Nobody doubts that Mesmer himself must have had this ability of being hypnotic. There are a number of other strategies that have been shown to increase theta activity, such as music or monochrome sounds, some meditation training practices, and neurofeedback. There is another EEG marker that seems to occur in hypnotism. It is called the 40 Hz band. The 40 Hz band is a high-frequency, low-amplitude EEG rhythm that centers around 40 Hz that is associated with the condition of focused attentional arousal. It has been reported that high hypnotizables showed greater 40 Hz production in their right hemispheres during hypnosis, while low hypnotizables showed reduced activity in both brain hemispheres. We are told that high hypnotizables compared to lows, both in waking and hypnosis conditions, have a greater capacity to access both positive and negative life emotional experiences, a capacity associated to task-related hemispheric shifts of fast EEG activity in the 40 Hz band. It seems that the 40 Hz band is the physiological marker of focused arousal. This 40 Hz band, also known as the 38 to 42 Hz gamma, is said to be associated with the theta band in hypnotized subjects, but the association between the gamma waves and the slow wave theta band is not well understood. There is a theory that much of neuropathology can be attributed to problems in brain timing, specifically the patient's brain waves being off. This neurofeedback, or EEG feedback, can show disruptions in brain self-regulation called dysrhythmias. These self-regulatory deficits are said to be responsible for various arousal disorders, for example, anxiety, attention disorders, mood disorders, seizure disorder, and specific learning deficits. Neurofeedback involves brain exercises that are directed at teaching the individual to self-correct their brainwave patterns. The presumption is that if you correct the brain, the patient's problems may correct as well. Arguably, this is what occurs when a healer or hypnotist's brainwaves become synchronized with the patient's. Indeed, it has now been established that the rhythms of brainwaves between two people simply taking part in a conversation begin to match each other. Also, massage and simple touching, and indeed even taking a placebo, have effects on the EEG and the state of mind. In fact, there is a strategy to manipulate brainwave patterns for the purpose of improving both hypnotizability and clinical symptom presentation, called EEG entrainment, which is exactly what is said to happen when a healer focuses on a patient. EEG entrainment involves the use of a stimulus, a binaural beat sound stimulation, to drive the brain. This is one of several brainwave changing processes that may also include breathing exercises, guided relaxation, and imagery processes. A binaural beat takes place when two different sound wave forms are presented stereophonically through headphones to a subject who will have the subjective perception of a third beat frequency occurring due to the difference between the two sound waves. The effects of listening to the binaural beats may be subjectively experienced as relaxing or stimulating depending on the frequencies used. It has been found to increase theta activity in the patient as well as increase hypnotic susceptibility in the low and medium susceptible groups. Obviously, Mesmer never used anything as sophisticated as this. Still, it is well known that he played music in his salons, which was calculated to set the mood for the séance. A model of the brain as an electronic device. I wish to present a specific model that consciousness is generated by electronics, that our brain is an electronic device, and that the brains of all living creatures are connected electronic devices. Firstly, the neural network is an integrated circuit. The neurons are logic gates that are either on or off. If they are on, then an action potential will flow along the axon. This integrated circuit generates ELF radio waves, brain waves, in the following ways. 1. Ions flow through the axon membrane as the action potential proceeds. 2. ORC or microtubule quantum vibrations generate EEG beat frequencies. 3. TPMET, transplasma membrane electron transfer, generates ELF radio waves from the cytoplasm of the neuron. The specific neurons that fire will then generate a specific brainwave, EEG frequency, depending, amongst other things, on the speed of the action potential. Some axons are myelinated, and this specific brainwave frequency contains information, signals, internally in the neural circuit and externally to other brains, electronic devices. These external brainwaves are normally received unconsciously by other brains, but they can be boosted, in which case they are received consciously. There is obviously a lot here that requires fuller explanation, but here is not the place to do it. I merely want to make the point that the definition of an electronic device is that it generates radio waves for the purpose of communication. And that is precisely what the brain is. This new initiative by Elon Musk is going to revolutionize brain research. His company Neuralink is taking electroencephalography to a whole new level. They are making EEG electrodes that contain thousands of microscopic pins, about 10 times thinner than a human hair, on a chip slightly smaller than a nano SIM card in a mobile phone that is connected wirelessly to the EEG computer interface, which again is portable and about the size of a mobile phone. These electrodes are actually inserted into the skull, and they will enable brainwaves to be read and recorded with 1,000 times more precision and accuracy than at present. What Neuralink has recognized is that the brain is not simply an electrochemical computer that happens to generate brainwaves as a secondary product. It is in fact an electronic device that has for primary purpose the generation of radio waves for the purpose of communication. When we combine the Neuralink project with the new research paper that I told you about earlier, which is the start of mind-reading technology that actually used standard EEG electrodes that were read by an AI deep learning device, we find that we have nothing short of a watershed in electronics. We find the essential link between the biological intelligence and artificial intelligence. An open letter dated 17th of July 2019 to Nina Mescarani, Mortimer B. Zuckerman Mind-Brain Behavior Institute, Columbia University, New York. Your paper, Towards Reconstructing Intelligible Speech from the Human Auditory Cortex, is going to usher in a new era in brainwave research. In theory, it should be possible to teach a DNN to read. You can read text to a subject, which can then be picked up as brainwaves by a DNN from the auditory cortex. You can also give the actual text of what is read to the DNN, and in this way it can learn to associate the brainwaves with the actual text that is read. The amount of data that can be presented to a DNN in this way is virtually limitless, and eventually the DNN could be taught to read brainwaves in all the extant languages in the world. The day before I wrote that letter, Elon Musk made his announcement that he was going to make EEG electrodes that would be 1,000 times more sensitive and would be inserted into the brain like the SIM card in a mobile phone. I realized that the implications for artificial intelligence and machine learning are astronomical. Elon Musk himself states that their ultimate goal is a brain-machine replace, i.e. a symbiosis with artificial intelligence. DNNs will learn to simulate human brainwaves and communicate with other DNNs. They will learn to do many things that machines cannot do. For instance, they will simulate the brainwaves from the math regions in the cortex to do mathematics the way humans do it, only quicker and more accurately. They will learn brainwaves from the dopamine pathways to simulate human emotions and behavioral patterns. They will have access to all the data of the human race. Eventually, we will build DNNs that are smarter than the human race collectively. The only thing they will not be able to simulate is our ability to procreate. They will still need us to build, maintain, and repair them and provide them with energy. Also, they will have a much shorter built-in obsolescence period than humans. They will probably need to be upgraded every 2 or 3 years and replaced with a new model every 10 years or so. These DNNs may be capable of original thinking. They will be able to read the thoughts and dream content coming from our unconscious mind while we are asleep. It may well be that they will be able to derive inspiration for original thinking from our thoughts that are not actually conscious to us. The essential point that I want to make here is that the brain is a sophisticated electronic device, and consciousness is generated by electronics, and is essentially the same as what happens when the screen lights up on your mobile phone. This explains how the brainwaves of a healer, hypnotist, and patient can become synchronized. Essentially, the brains of all living creatures are connected at the cellular and genetic level via brainwaves, ELF radio waves, just like all wirelessly connected electronic devices. Mesmer's animal magnetism is no different from what happens when you wave your credit card over a wireless payment device. Subconsciously, we are reading each other's animal magnetism as if we were wirelessly reading the balance on their credit card. Contemporary examples of animal magnetism. The whole thrust of Mesmer's theory 250 years ago is that magnetism has a twofold nature: the mineral magnetism present in metal and the animal magnetism present in the human body. Some persons are endowed with unusual amounts of animal magnetism. This animal magnetism issues from their fingertips in such quantity that it can be sent as a healing force into afflicted parts of other human bodies. He actually ceased using magnets, and he insisted that the baquet, which he used in his salon in Paris, was just an accessory. 250 years ago, nothing was known about brainwaves, so he really had to assume that this power that he knew he had was emanating from his fingertips. This article offers a specific scientific explanation for his charisma, which according to him was due to his having an unusual amount of animal magnetism, which enabled him to mesmerize his followers. It is submitted that in the light of advances in electroencephalography, optogenetics, and radiogenetics, all of which involve radio waves for the purpose of communication in cellular and genetic processes, that the secret to Mesmer's power over other people was that he actually had the ability to channel his brain waves. They fell under his spell literally due to the power of his mind. Over the centuries there have been many charlatans, spiritual leaders, prophets, and cult leaders who, like Mesmer, wielded extraordinary power and control over a large band of followers that can likewise be explained by the ability to channel their brainwaves to mesmerize their followers. And now we have two extraordinary people who are currently awaiting trial in the United States: Elizabeth Holmes with the Theranos scam, and Keith Raniere, the vanguard of the Nexium cult that was branding his initials into the pelvic area of his sex slave. It is submitted that there is only one thing that can adequately explain their antics, and that is animal magnetism in the sense originally used by Mesmer, which is actually an ability to channel their brain waves to have a magnetic mesmerizing effect over their followers.